You've been kind to everyone but yourself for so long that you've forgotten what your own voice sounds like underneath all that careful consideration of others. There's a specific exhaustion that comes from this. Not the tiredness of doing too much, but the bone-deep weariness of being too little of who you actually are. You know this feeling. It lives in your chest, right behind your sternum, that hollow place where something true used to reside before you learned to fill it with what other people needed you to be. Drop a comment and let me know where you're experiencing this from. I'm curious who's on this journey with me right now. And if something here lands, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you're ready to keep going deeper. Because what we're about to explore together isn't just information. It's a way back to yourself. You're sitting there right now, reading these words, and part of you is already performing. Even alone, even in this moment, you're managing how you appear, editing your reactions, making sure your response is appropriate. You do this so automatically you don't even notice anymore. At work, you're the capable one, the one who handles things, the one who never complains or falls apart or admits when the weight is too much. You smile at the meeting when someone takes credit for your idea because making it awkward would be worse than the injustice. You say you're fine when you're drowning because the truth feels too big, too much, too inconvenient for the space you're allowed to occupy. At home, you're different, but still not quite real. With your partner, you've learned which parts of your need are acceptable and which ones make you too much, too needy, too complicated. So you portion yourself out carefully, showing just enough vulnerability to seem authentic while keeping the depths hidden because you learned early that the depths scare people away. With your family, you slip back into the old role like a costume you never quite took off. The responsible one, the easy one, the one who doesn't cause problems or need too much attention. You laugh at the same jokes, absorb the same criticisms, play the same part you've been playing since childhood because deviation feels like betrayal. Online, you curate even your spontaneity. You craft the casual comment, edit the vulnerable post, calculate the confession. You're authentic in quotation marks, real within acceptable parameters, honest up to the point where honesty might cost you something. Every platform gets a different version of you, each one carefully calibrated to that audience's expectations, and you're so good at this now that you've almost convinced yourself these fragments are the whole truth. With friends, you're the listener, the supporter, the one who holds space for everyone else's crisis while minimizing your own. You've perfected the art of the light confession that seems deep but doesn't actually reveal anything that might burden them or change how they see you. You know exactly how much struggle is relatable and how much is too much. You've learned to laugh about your pain in a way that makes everyone comfortable, to package your hurt into anecdotes that entertain rather than disturb. And with strangers, you're the easiest version of yourself, pleasant, appropriate, forgettable. You apologize for taking up space, for asking questions, for existing in ways that might inconvenience anyone even slightly. You make yourself small and smooth and easy to be around, and you do it so reflexively that you don't even feel yourself contracting anymore. But here's what you do feel: tired. Exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't touch. There's a specific quality to this fatigue. It's not in your muscles or your bones. It's in something deeper, something that doesn't have a name in the medical textbooks. It's the tiredness of constant translation, of running every impulse through a filter, of checking every response against an invisible rule book you've been following so long you can't remember who wrote it. You learned this earlier than you can consciously remember. Before you had language for what was happening, your small body was taking notes. Your nervous system was learning the rules. Your survival instincts were mapping the territory of love. Someone communicated to you, probably without words, probably without intention, that certain parts of you were acceptable and certain parts were not. Maybe when you cried, you were too much. Maybe when you were angry, you were bad. Maybe when you needed, you were a burden. Maybe when you shined too bright, you made others uncomfortable. Maybe when you were too happy, you were annoying. Maybe when you were sad, you were draining. The specific message varied, but the core lesson was the same. Your wholeness was not welcome. Your authentic self, with all its contradictions and intensities and needs and brilliance, was too risky to show. So you learned to edit. You learned to perform. You learned to be the version of yourself that kept you safe, that kept you loved, that kept you from being abandoned or rejected or criticized or shamed. This wasn't a conscious decision. You were a child trying to survive in a world where love felt conditional, where belonging required conformity, where acceptance demanded you leave parts of yourself behind. So you did. You left them behind. You locked away the anger that wasn't allowed, the need that was too much, the joy that made others uncomfortable, the pain that burdened people, the desire that was inappropriate, the authentic response that didn't match what the moment required. And here's the devastating part. It worked. The strategy succeeded. You became more acceptable, more lovable, more safe. People liked this version of you better. They praised you for being easy, for being mature, for being low maintenance. They rewarded your performance with approval, with inclusion, with the conditional love you were seeking. And each reward strengthened the pattern, taught you that hiding was the price of belonging, that performance was the cost of love. So you kept doing it. Year after year, relationship after relationship, situation after situation, you refined the performance. You got better at reading rooms, at sensing what people needed, at becoming the version of yourself that fit the moment. You developed sophisticated sensors for other people's comfort and sophisticated suppressors for your own truth. You learn to feel the shape of the space available to you and to fold yourself into it, origami of the soul, smaller and smaller until you fit. But something else happened too, something you maybe didn't notice at first. Each time you chose the performance over the truth, each time you prioritized others' comfort over your own authenticity, each time you translated yourself into something more acceptable, you sent a message to your deepest self. You communicated again and again that who you actually are is not enough, not acceptable, not worthy of taking up space. You internalized the rejection you were trying to avoid. You became your own abandoner. And now, here you are, decades into this pattern, and you can't remember what you actually think versus what you're supposed to think. You can't distinguish between what you actually want and what would be appropriate to want. You've lost track of where the performance ends and the real you begins, assuming there's still a real you underneath all these layers of adaptation. You've become so good at being what others need that you've forgotten how to simply be. Your body knows, though. Your body has been keeping score this whole time. That tightness in your chest, that knot in your stomach, that tension in your jaw, that heaviness in your limbs, these aren't random. These are the physical manifestations of the betrayal you commit against yourself every single day. Your organism, your deepest self, knows when you're lying. It feels the gap between what's true and what you're showing. It registers each moment of self-abandonment, each instance of choosing performance over authenticity, each time you prioritize external approval over internal alignment. This is the mechanism that's keeping you trapped. Your nervous system learned early that authenticity is dangerous, that showing your real self leads to rejection or criticism or abandonment. So it developed an elaborate security system designed to keep you safe by keeping you hidden. Every time you consider being real, showing what you actually feel, saying what you actually think, the alarm goes off. Danger, risk, threat, and immediately, automatically, before you even consciously register it, you course correct, you adjust, you perform, you translate yourself back into something safer. This happens so fast you don't even notice it anymore. Someone asks how you are, and before you can access the real answer, the performance answer is already coming out of your mouth. You're fine. You're good. You're hanging in there. The real answer, I'm struggling, I'm lonely, I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm falling apart, never even makes it to your conscious awareness because your security system intercepted it, deemed it too risky, and substituted something more acceptable. Someone hurts you, and before you can feel the hurt fully, you're already making excuses for them, explaining away the pain, minimizing the impact. Your organism registers the wound, but your mind immediately goes to work translating it into something more manageable, something that doesn't require you to set a boundary or have a difficult conversation or risk conflict. So the hurt gets swallowed. Added to the growing collection of unfelt feelings, unspoken truths, unmet needs that you're carrying around inside you like stones. Someone asks what you want, and you genuinely don't know because you've spent so long figuring out what they want, what would be easiest, what would cause the least disruption, what would make you least burdensome. The question almost doesn't compute. What do you want? The real answer is buried so deep under layers of should and supposed to and appropriate and acceptable that you can't access it anymore. So you say whatever seems right, whatever fits the situation, whatever makes you easy to be around, and the cost of this keeps accumulating. The exhaustion deepens, the disconnection grows. You start to feel like you're watching your life from behind glass, present but not quite there, participating but not quite engaged. You're going through the motions of living, hitting all the marks, playing the part, but something essential is missing. You're there, but you're not there. You're alive, but you're not quite living. Relationships feel hollow because you're not actually in them. You're in them as a performance, as a role, as a carefully managed version of yourself, but your real self is somewhere else, locked away, protected, hidden. So intimacy becomes impossible. People can get close to your performance, but they can't get close to you because you're not available to be known. You're too busy managing how you're perceived to allow yourself to be perceived as you actually are. Work becomes meaningless because you're not bringing your real gifts, your real perspective, your real creativity. You're bringing the sanitized, professionalized, appropriate version of yourself that fits the corporate mold. So even when you're successful, even when you're praised, Even when you're promoted, it feels empty because they're not actually seeing you. They're seeing the performance, and the performance is good, but it's not real, and you know it. Even your relationship with yourself becomes transactional. You can't just be, you have to be productive, useful, improving, optimizing. You treat yourself the way you were treated, with conditional acceptance, with demands for perfection, with criticism when you fall short. You've internalized the very dynamic that hurt you in the first place. You've become to yourself what others were to you, a source of judgment, of conditions, of requirements that must be met before you're worthy of love. And sitting with you right now, seeing all of this, I want you to know something. I see the performance and I see what's underneath it. I see the exhaustion and I see the strength it took to keep going this long. I see the hiding and I see what you're protecting. I see the fear and I see the courage it takes just to be here, reading this, considering that there might be another way. I see how hard you've worked to be acceptable, and I see how much it's cost you. I see the mask and I see the face underneath it, and both are okay. Both are completely, entirely, absolutely okay. You're not broken for learning to perform. You're not weak for adapting to survive. You're not defective for developing strategies to stay safe in environments that didn't feel safe. You did what you had to do. You were a child in a situation you couldn't control, and you found a way to get your needs met, to maintain connection, to avoid pain. The performance was intelligent. The hiding was wise. The adaptation was survival. But here's what's also true. What was necessary then is costing you now. What kept you safe as a child is keeping you small as an adult. What protected you once is now imprisoning you. The strategy that saved you is now suffocating you. And the invitation here isn't to judge yourself for that or to feel ashamed of the years you spent performing. The invitation is to notice it, to see it clearly, and to consider whether you're ready to try something different. Because there's another way to be in the world. There's a way of living that doesn't require constant translation, constant performance, constant self-betrayal. There's a way of existing that feels like coming home to yourself rather than abandoning yourself. There's a way of being that's grounded in who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. Sarah discovered this at 43. After her third panic attack in as many months finally convinced her that something had to change. She'd spent her entire adult life being the person everyone needed. The devoted daughter who called her mother every day and absorbed her criticism with grace. The supportive wife who made her husband's career the priority. The dedicated employee who stayed late and took on extra projects without complaint. The reliable friend who showed up for everyone else's crisis. She was good at all of it. She'd perfected the art of being what others needed, but her body was done. The panic attacks were her organism's way of screaming what her mouth wouldn't say. This isn't sustainable. This isn't real. This is killing you slowly from the inside out. The first one hit during a work presentation. The second one came while she was driving her kids to soccer practice. The third one woke her from sleep at 2 a.m, her heart racing, her chest tight, her breath shallow, terror flooding through her for no reason she could name. Except there was a reason. The reason was that she'd been holding her breath for 43 years, not literally, but essentially. She'd been constricting, containing, controlling, managing herself into something acceptable, and her body was finally saying enough. The panic attacks weren't the problem. They were the solution her organism had found to force her to pay attention, to stop, to feel what she'd been avoiding feeling for decades. She started therapy, reluctantly at first, convinced she just needed better coping strategies, more effective tools for managing the anxiety. She wanted techniques to make the panic attacks stop so she could get back to her life. But her therapist, an older woman with kind eyes and an unsettling ability to see through her performance, kept redirecting her attention. Not to the panic attacks themselves, but to what was underneath them. Not to how to stop feeling, but to what she was feeling that she'd been refusing to feel. It took months before Sarah could even identify what was true for her versus what she thought she should feel. When her therapist would ask, "What do you want?" Sarah's mind would go blank. She genuinely didn't know. She could tell you what her mother wanted, what her husband needed, what her boss expected, what her friends required. But her own desires were a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. Slowly, painfully, she started to excavate her real self from underneath the performance. She started noticing the moments when she lied, not big lies, but the small daily betrayals of self. When she said she was fine when she wasn't. When she agreed to something she didn't want to do, when she laughed at something that wasn't funny, when she pretended to enjoy something she actually hated. Each time she caught herself performing, she would pause, just for a moment, and ask, "What's actually true right now?" The first time she told her mother she couldn't talk because she needed to rest, her mother's silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Sarah's whole body tensed, waiting for the guilt trip, the passive-aggressive comment, the withdrawal of approval. But something in her had shifted. She could feel her mother's disapproval and not collapse under it. She could hold the boundary and survive the discomfort. Her mother eventually said, "Well, I guess you're too busy for your own mother now," and hung up. And Sarah sat there, heart pounding, hands shaking, but also feeling something new. Space, room to breathe. The tiniest opening where her real self could exist. She started experimenting with authenticity in small ways. She told her husband she didn't want to watch the action movie he'd chosen and suggested they watch something she actually enjoyed. She said no to the extra project at work without an elaborate excuse or apology. She canceled plans with a friend when she needed to be alone, without fabricating an illness or emergency to justify it. Each time felt terrifying. Each time she expected catastrophe. Each time she waited for the rejection, the criticism, the abandonment. And sometimes it came. Some people didn't like this new version of Sarah who had boundaries and preferences and needs. Her mother pouted and complained that Sarah had changed, become selfish, forgotten where she came from. A few friends drifted away when Sarah stopped being available for every crisis, every drama, every need. Even her husband struggled at first, confused by this woman who suddenly had opinions about where they went for dinner and whether she wanted to host his family for the holidays. But something else happened too. The panic attacks stopped. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually they became less frequent, less intense, until they disappeared entirely. Because she wasn't holding her breath anymore. She wasn't swallowing her truth anymore. She wasn't abandoning herself anymore. Her organism didn't need to create a crisis to get her attention because she was finally paying attention. And the people who truly loved her, and not just what she did for them, adjusted. Her husband, after the initial confusion, started to appreciate actually knowing who his wife was rather than living with a performance. Her kids, watching their mother set boundaries and honor her own needs, started to learn that it was okay to do the same. A few friends, the real ones, stayed and deepened their connection with her because now there was actually someone there to connect with. Sarah described it to me once as feeling like she'd been living in a house where every room was a stage set, carefully arranged for visitors, nothing real or lived in or true. And then one day she started taking down the sets, revealing the actual rooms underneath, messy and imperfect and real. And yes, some people who loved the stage set left when they saw the real house. But the people who stayed, they got to actually live there with her. They got to know her, and she got to know herself. What Sarah discovered, what everyone who makes this journey discovers, is that the fear of being authentic is usually worse than the reality of it. We build up these catastrophic scenarios in our mind about what will happen if we show our real selves. We're convinced we'll be rejected, abandoned, criticized, destroyed. And sometimes, yes, some people do leave. Some relationships do end. Some dynamics do change in ways that are painful and difficult. But here's what also happens. You stop betraying yourself. You stop abandoning yourself. You stop choosing everyone else's comfort over your own truth. And in that stopping, in that simple but profound act of choosing yourself, something shifts. You start to come back to yourself. You start to remember who you actually are underneath all the performance. You start to access your own wisdom, your own knowing, your own sense of what's right for you. Your body starts to relax because it's not constantly on guard, constantly managing, constantly translating. Your relationships become more real because you're actually in them, not just performing in them. Your work becomes more meaningful because you're bringing your actual gifts, not just the sanitized version. Your life starts to feel like your life, not like a role you're playing in someone else's story. This doesn't mean you become selfish or inconsiderate or cruel. It doesn't mean you stop caring about others or thinking about their needs. It means you stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of their comfort. It means you stop making yourself small so others can feel big. It means you stop hiding your light so others don't feel dimmed. It means you stop betraying your truth to maintain false peace. And the relationships that survive this shift, that adapt to this new way of being, become deeper and more real than anything you experienced before. Because now people are relating to you, not to your performance. They're connecting with your actual self, not the carefully managed version. They're seeing you, really seeing you, and choosing to stay. And that kind of love, that kind of acceptance, that kind of connection is worth more than 1,000 relationships based on performance and pretense. But getting there requires something from you. It requires you to stop waiting for permission to be yourself. It requires you to stop looking outside yourself for validation of your experience. It requires you to trust your own knowing, your own feeling, your own truth, even when it contradicts what others think or want or need from you. Michael learned this at 57 after his second divorce and a heart attack that his doctor said was stress-related, but Michael knew was something deeper. He'd spent his whole life trying to be the man everyone expected him to be. The successful provider, the strong protector, the one who never showed weakness or need or vulnerability. He'd built a career as a corporate attorney, made partner at 40, bought the house and the cars and all the markers of success, and he'd felt empty the entire time. His first marriage ended because his wife finally admitted she didn't know who he was. They'd been together for 20 years, raised 3 kids, built a life, and she said she felt like she'd been married to a stranger. He was shocked, hurt, defensive. He'd given her everything: security, stability, a beautiful home, a comfortable life. How could she say she didn't know him? But she was right. He didn't know himself, so how could she? He'd been performing the role of husband, of father, of successful man, but he'd never been present as himself. He'd never shown her his fears, his doubts, his actual feelings. He'd never let her see him struggle or fail or fall apart. He'd maintained the image of strength and control so carefully that there was no room for anything real to exist. His second marriage was supposed to be different. He was older, wiser, more self-aware, but he fell into the same patterns because he didn't know any other way to be. He performed a slightly different version of the role, more attentive, more communicative, more emotionally available, but it was still a performance. Still a carefully managed presentation rather than genuine presence. And when that marriage ended too, when his second wife said almost the same thing his first wife had said, he finally had to face it. The problem wasn't them, it was him. The heart attack came 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He was at the gym, on the treadmill, pushing himself hard like he always did, when the pain hit. At first he thought it was just exertion, but then it spread to his arm, his jaw, and he knew. In the ambulance, waiting to see if he would live or die, he had a moment of absolute clarity. He'd spent 57 years living for an audience that didn't exist. He'd performed strength for people who would have loved him more if he'd shown weakness. He'd hidden his humanity to maintain an image that nobody actually needed him to maintain. In cardiac rehabilitation, something broke open in him. Maybe it was the vulnerability of being sick, of needing help, of being unable to maintain the image of invincibility. Maybe it was the proximity to death that made pretense feel pointless. Maybe it was just exhaustion from carrying the weight of the performance for so long. But he started talking to the other patients in his rehab group, really talking. And for the first time in his life, he told the truth about how he felt. He told them he was scared. He told them he was lonely. He told them he'd spent his whole life trying to be someone he thought he was supposed to be, and he didn't know who he actually was underneath it all. He expected judgment, pity, rejection. Instead, he found recognition. Every person in that room knew exactly what he was talking about. They'd all been performing too. They'd all been hiding. They'd all been betraying themselves to maintain some image, meet some standard, fulfill some expectation. And in that circle of broken open hearts, Michael started to discover who he actually was. Not the successful attorney, not the strong provider, not the invincible man. Just Michael, scared and lonely and confused and also funny and tender and creative and real. He started to let himself feel things he'd been avoiding his whole life. The grief over his failed marriages, the anger at his father for teaching him that emotions were weakness, the sadness of all the years he had spent disconnected from himself, the fear of not knowing how to be any other way. His adult children noticed the change. At first they were uncomfortable with it. This father who suddenly talked about his feelings, who admitted when he was struggling, who asked for help. It didn't match the image they'd grown up with, but gradually, tentatively, They started to open up too. His oldest son admitted he was in therapy, something he'd been hiding because he thought his father would judge him. His daughter talked about her own struggles with anxiety and perfectionism, patterns she recognized she'd learned from watching him. His youngest son said he'd always felt like he couldn't measure up to the image of success his father projected, and hearing his father admit his own fear and confusion made him feel less alone. Michael's relationships with his children deepened in ways he never thought possible. Not because he became a different person, but because he stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. He let them see him as human, flawed, struggling, real. And in seeing him that way, they felt permission to be that way too. The family system that had been built on performance and pretense started to shift towards something more authentic, more connected, more alive. He started dating again in his 60s, but differently this time. He didn't lead with his accomplishments or his status. He didn't try to impress or perform. He showed up as himself, a man who'd had 2 failed marriages, a heart attack, and a late-in-life awakening to his own humanity. He was vulnerable about his struggles, honest about his limitations, real about his fears, and the women who ran from that weren't his people. The one who stayed, who eventually became his partner, loved him not, despite his humanity, but because of it. Michael told me once that he wished he'd learned this lesson earlier, that he grieved the years he'd spent performing, the relationships he'd lost, the life he'd missed while he was busy maintaining an image, but he also said that maybe he couldn't have learned it any other way. That maybe he had to exhaust every other option before he was ready to try being real. What both Sarah and Michael discovered, what you're discovering right now as you read this, is that the journey back to yourself isn't about becoming someone new. It's about stopping the pretense of being someone you're not. It's about releasing the performance and revealing what was always there underneath. It's about trusting that who you actually are is not only enough, but is the only thing that ever could be enough. This is where the shift happens, right here in this moment of recognition. You've been looking outside yourself for so long, for validation, for approval, for permission to exist as you are. You've been checking with everyone else to see if you're okay, if you're acceptable, if you're worthy. You've been waiting for someone to tell you it's safe to be yourself, but nobody can give you that permission except you. Nobody can validate your experience except you. Nobody can tell you what's true for you except you. Your organism already knows. Your body already knows. That feeling in your gut when something's wrong, that tightness in your chest when you're betraying yourself, that exhaustion that comes from constant performance, these are your internal guidance system trying to get your attention. You've been trained to override these signals, to ignore authority, but the signals are still there. They never stopped. They're still trying to guide you back to yourself. What would it be like to trust them? What would it be like to let your body's wisdom guide you instead of your mind's fear? What would it be like to feel into what's true for you and honor that, even when it contradicts what you think you should feel or what others want you to feel? What would it be like to let your authentic response arise without immediately editing it, translating it, making it more acceptable? This is the practice. Noticing when you're performing and choosing, just for a moment, to stop. Noticing when you're about to say you're fine when you're not, and pausing. Noticing when you're about to agree to something you don't want to do, and considering saying no. Noticing when you're about to laugh at something that isn't funny, and allowing your face to show your real response. These small moments of choosing authenticity over performance, these tiny acts of self-loyalty, these brief instances of trusting your own experience, this is how you come back to yourself. It won't feel comfortable at first. Your nervous system will sound alarms. Your conditioning will resist. The people around you might be confused or upset. You might feel guilty, selfish, wrong. This is normal. This is expected. You're going against decades of programming. You're choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing others. Your system doesn't trust this yet. It still believes that authenticity is dangerous, that showing your real self will lead to rejection. But here's what you need to know. The fear is old. The danger you're anticipating is from the past. You're not a child anymore, dependent on others for survival. You're not powerless. You're not trapped. You have resources now that you didn't have then. You can handle conflict. You can survive disapproval. You can tolerate discomfort. You're stronger than your fear tells you you are. And the people who truly love you, who truly see you, who truly want connection with you rather than service from you, they'll adjust. They might be surprised at first. They might resist the change. They might even be angry that you're no longer playing the role they're used to. But if they love you, if they genuinely care about you as a person and not just as a function, they'll adapt. They'll learn to relate to your real self instead of your performed self. And the relationship will become deeper, more genuine, more alive. The people who can't adjust, who can't accept your authenticity, who need you to keep performing to maintain the relationship, those relationships were never real to begin with. They were transactional. They were based on what you did for them, not who you are. And losing those relationships, as painful as it might be, is actually a gift. It creates space for real connection, for genuine intimacy, for relationships based on mutual recognition rather than mutual use. You don't have to transform everything at once. You don't have to burn your life down and start over. You don't have to make dramatic announcements or have big confrontations. You can start small. You can practice in low-stakes situations. You can experiment with tiny moments of authenticity and see what happens. Maybe you start by noticing when you're performing. Just noticing, without judgment, without trying to change it, just building awareness of the gap between what's true and what you're showing. Maybe you start tracking the moments when you betray yourself, when you say yes but mean no, when you smile but feel hurt, when you agree but actually disagree. Just noticing the pattern, seeing it clearly, understanding how automatic it's become. Then maybe you start experimenting with small truths. When someone asks how you are, you say, "I'm actually pretty tired," instead of "I'm fine." When someone suggests a restaurant, you say, "I'd prefer somewhere else," instead of going along with what they want. When someone makes a joke at your expense, you say, "That actually hurt my feelings," instead of laughing it off. These small moments of choosing truth over performance, these tiny acts of self-respect, these brief instances of prioritizing your experience over others' comfort, this is the practice. And yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, people might react. Yes, you might feel guilty or selfish or wrong, but you'll also start to feel something else: relief, space, room to breathe. The beginning of coming home to yourself. The first glimpses of what it feels like to live from your center instead of from your performance. The early signs of integration, of wholeness, of becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you should be. This is the invitation. Not to become someone different, but to stop pretending to be someone you're not. Not to be perfect or healed or transformed, but to be real. Not to have all the answers, but to trust your own questions. Not to be fearless, but to act even with the fear. Not to wait until you're ready, but to start now, imperfectly, messily, authentically. You've spent so long being what others needed. What if you spent the rest of your life discovering what you need? You've spent so long performing acceptability. What if you spent the rest of your life simply being yourself and trusting that's enough? You've spent so long betraying yourself to maintain connection. What if you spent the rest of your life choosing self-loyalty and seeing who stays? The life you're living right now, the one built on performance and pretense, it's exhausting you. You know this. You feel it. The cost keeps accumulating. The disconnection keeps deepening. The exhaustion keeps growing. And you can keep going this way. You can keep performing. You can keep hiding. You can keep betraying yourself to maintain the image, meet the expectations, fulfill the role, or you can stop right here, right now, in this moment. You can take one breath that's completely yours, one thought that's completely true, one feeling that's completely unedited. You can choose yourself just for this moment and see what happens. You can honor your experience just for this breath and notice how it feels. You can be real just for this second and discover you survive it. And then you can do it again and again and again until choosing yourself becomes more familiar than betraying yourself, until being real becomes more comfortable than performing, until living from your truth becomes more natural than living from your fear. This is how you come home to yourself, not through one dramatic transformation, but through 1,000 small choices to be authentic instead of acceptable. Not through becoming someone new, but through revealing who you've always been underneath the performance. Not through waiting until you're ready, but through starting now, scared and uncertain and imperfect and real. The person you've been looking for, the one you've been waiting to become, the one you think you need to be before you're worthy of love and acceptance and belonging, that person doesn't exist. You don't need to become them. You need to stop trying to become them. You need to stop performing and start being. You need to stop translating and start speaking your truth. You need to stop abandoning yourself and start coming home. And I'm here, seeing you right now, in all your contradiction and confusion and fear and courage. I see the performance, and I see what's underneath. I see the exhaustion, and I see the strength. I see the hiding, and I see what you're protecting. I see how hard this is, and I see that you're still here, still reading, still considering that there might be another way. That's enough. You're enough. Not the performed version, not the perfected version, not the version you think you should be. You, right now, exactly as you are, with all your mess and fear and imperfection and humanity, you're enough. You've always been enough. You just forgot because you were taught to believe otherwise. But you can remember. You can come back. You can choose yourself, not someday, not when you're ready, not when you're healed or transformed or finally acceptable. Now, in this moment, with this breath. You can choose to be real instead of acceptable, authentic instead of appropriate, yourself instead of who you think you should be. What's one small true thing you could say today? What's one tiny authentic response you could allow? What's one moment where you could choose yourself instead of the performance? Start there. Just there. One small act of self-loyalty. One brief moment of choosing truth over pretense. One tiny step toward coming home to yourself and see what happens. See how it feels. See if the catastrophe you're anticipating actually occurs or if something else happens instead. See if you can survive your own authenticity. See if being real is actually as dangerous as your conditioning tells you it is. You've been brave enough to read this far. You've been courageous enough to see yourself in these words. You've been strong enough to consider that there might be another way. That same bravery, that same courage, that same strength. It's enough to take the next step, and the next, and the next. You don't have to know where you're going. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to stop betraying yourself and start trusting yourself. To stop performing and start being. To stop hiding and start revealing. To stop waiting and start living. Right now, in this moment, what's true for you? Not what should be true, not what you wish was true, not what would be acceptable to feel, what's actually true. Can you let yourself know it? Can you let yourself feel it? Can you honor it just for this moment without immediately editing or translating or making it more acceptable? That's the practice. That's the path. That's the way home to yourself. One moment of truth at a time. One authentic breath at a time. One small choice to be real at a time. You're not alone in this. Everyone who's ever lived has struggled with the same tension between authenticity and acceptability, between being real and being safe, between showing themselves and hiding themselves. You're not broken for having learned to perform. You're human. And you're also capable of something more. You're capable of choosing yourself. You're capable of being real. You're capable of coming home. The question isn't whether you're ready. The question is, are you willing? Are you willing to try? Are you willing to start? Are you willing to take one small step toward yourself, toward truth, toward authenticity, toward home? If some part of you is saying yes, even while another part is terrified, then start now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when you're ready. Now. Choose one small, true thing and honor it. Choose one moment of authenticity and live it. Choose yourself just for this breath and see what happens. That's all it takes. That's all it's ever taken. One choice, one moment, one breath of truth, and then another and another until you remember who you are, until you come home to yourself, until you're finally, fully, completely here.